I dragged myself through the front door after another double shift at the steel factory. My muscles ached, and my clothes reeked of sweat and metal shavings. All I wanted was a hot shower and dinner with my wife, Casey. But something felt wrong the moment I stepped inside. Casey stood in our kitchen, arms crossed, wearing that cold look I'd learned to fear. "We need to talk," she said without looking up from her phone. I dropped my work boots and walked over, every step feeling heavier. "What's wrong?" She finally looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not anger. Something much worse. "I took the money," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. "What money?" I asked, though my stomach was already dropping. "All of it. Every penny from our savings account. Gave it to my family." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. 3 years of overtime. 3 years of skipping meals. 3 years of saving every dollar for our dream house. Gone. "That was $47,000, I whispered. "They needed it more," she replied, turning away like the conversation was over. "What do you mean you gave it away?" My voice cracked. "That was our money. Our future." Casey shrugged like she'd just told me she forgot to buy milk. "My family comes first, Jones. They always will." I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and checked our bank account. $0.13. Everything we'd worked for, vanished. Heavy footsteps echoed on our front porch. The door swung open without a knock, and Derek, Casey's younger brother, strutted in like he owned the place. He was grinning, wearing brand new clothes and expensive sneakers. Well, Derek said, looking me up and down with disgust. "If it isn't the factory boy. Thanks for the donation, loser." My hands clenched into fists. "You took my money?" "Casey's money," Derek corrected with a smirk. "And she was smart enough to share it with family. Unlike some people who hoard cash like greedy pigs." The room spun around me. This wasn't just Casey's decision. This was planned. "You just stole from the wrong man," I whispered under my breath. Derek laughed, but something in my eyes made him step back slightly. After Derek left, I sat alone in our bedroom, staring at the ceiling. All those nights I'd worked until my hands bled. All those weekends fixing cars for extra cash. All those times I'd said no to friends because I needed to save money. For what? So my wife could hand it over to her lazy brother who'd never worked a real job in his life? I pulled out our bank statements from the dresser drawer. 3 years of deposits. 3 years of careful budgeting. 3 years of dreaming about the house we'd picked out together. That's when I saw it. A piece of paper on Casey's nightstand. A property deed with her father's name on it. Bought with my money. I stared at that deed for a long time, feeling something cold and calculating settle in my chest. They thought they were so smart, stealing from the dumb factory worker. They thought I'd just accept it and move on. They were wrong. I carefully photographed the deed, then put it back exactly where I'd found it. If Casey's family wanted to play games, I'd show them what a real player looked like. The first spark of my revenge plan began to form. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years. I needed answers, and I needed them now. The property deed was for a house in the nice part of town. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, big backyard. Everything Casey and I had dreamed of having someday. Except her father's name was on the title, not ours. I drove to the address, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The house was beautiful. Fresh paint, new landscaping, expensive cars in the driveway. My money had bought all of it. Casey's whole family was there, having some kind of celebration on the front lawn. Helen, her mother, was directing workers installing a new fence. Derek was showing off his motorcycle to friends. And there was Casey, laughing like she didn't have a care in the world. I parked across the street and watched them for an hour. They were living the dream I'd worked so hard for, using money I'd earned with my own sweat and blood. When Helen spotted me, she walked over with a huge smile. "Jones. Isn't it wonderful? We finally got the house we always wanted." "With my money," I said quietly. Her smile didn't fade. "Casey's money. She's such a generous girl." I started taking pictures of everything. The deed, the house, the receipts scattered on their patio table. I didn't know what I was going to do with them yet, but something told me I'd need proof later. The lawyer's office smelled like old books and disappointment. Mr. Wilson, a tired-looking man in his 50s, listened to my story with the expression of someone who'd heard it all before. "Let me get this straight," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Your wife transferred money from your joint account to her family, and they purchased property with those funds." "That's right. Without my permission." Mr. Wilson leaned back in his chair. "Here's the problem, Jones. Since it was a joint account, legally, she had every right to access those funds." My heart sank. "So there's nothing I can do?" "Well, it depends." He pulled out a legal pad. "If you could prove coercion, fraud, or forgery, that might change things. But proving your wife acted with malicious intent? That's tough." I thought about the way Derek had smirked at me, the way Helen had acted like stealing someone's life savings was perfectly normal. What if I could prove they planned this? You'd need solid evidence. Documents, recordings, something concrete. Mr. Wilson looked at me seriously. "But Jones, going after family in court gets ugly fast. Are you sure you want to open that door?" I thought about 3 years of 18-hour days. 3 years of choosing work over sleep. "Yes," I said. "I'm sure." That weekend, I pretended everything was fine. I made Casey her favorite breakfast, brought her coffee in bed, and acted like the perfect husband. She seemed surprised but pleased. "I've been thinking about what you said," I told her as we sat on our couch. "About family coming first." Her eyes lit up. "Really? You're not angry anymore? I understand why you did it. Your family needed help." The words tasted like poison. That afternoon, Casey went to her mother's house for their weekly family dinner. She invited me, but I declined, saying I was tired. What she didn't know was that I'd been planning this moment for days. I followed her at a distance and parked down the street from Helen's house. Then I crept around to the back, where I knew they liked to sit on the porch after dinner. The windows were open, and I could hear everything. "I still can't believe how easy it was," Helen was saying. "Jones is such a pushover." "I know, right?" Casey laughed. "He worked so hard for that money, and he didn't even fight me on it." Derek's voice joined in. "The best part is, we got his electronic signature on the transfer forms without him even knowing. That computer program worked perfectly." My blood ran cold. Electronic signature? I'd never signed anything. I pulled out my phone and started recording, crouching in the bushes. This was exactly the evidence I needed. "Davis, you're not going to believe this," I said, showing my best friend the recording on my phone. Davis listened to the whole thing twice, his expression getting darker each time. "Dude, they forged your signature. That's identity theft. That's fraud." Davis was the only person I'd trusted with the whole story. We'd been friends since high school, and he'd always been the smart one. While I learned to work with my hands, he'd gotten a degree in business. "First, you need more evidence," he said. "One recording might not be enough. You need documents, financial records, anything that shows this was planned." "How am I supposed to get that?" "You live with one of them. Casey probably has copies of everything on her computer or in her files. Davis paused, studying my face. But Jones, are you doing this for justice, or revenge? The question hit me harder than I expected. Does it matter? Yeah, it does. Justice means getting your money back. Revenge means burning everything down. I thought about that for a long time. Maybe a little of both. Davis shook his head. Be careful, man. Anger can make you do stupid things. 3 days later, Casey caught me on my laptop at 2 in the morning, researching property law. What are you doing? She asked suspiciously. I quickly closed the laptop, my heart racing. Just having trouble sleeping, I lied. You know how I get when I'm stressed about money. Casey studied my face for a moment, then seemed to relax. Jones, I know this is hard. But sometimes we have to make sacrifices for the people we love. I'm trying to understand that, I said, which was true in a way. She sat down next to me and took my hand. For a moment, she looked like the woman I'd fallen in love with 4 years ago. My family's been through so much, she continued. Dad's been out of work. Derek's trying to start his business. Mom's been struggling since her divorce. What about our dreams? The house we picked out together? We're young. We have time to save again. She squeezed my hand. Besides, don't you feel good knowing we helped the people who matter most? I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded and said, I'm trying to see it that way. The next day, Helen called to invite me to a celebration party at their new house. It's going to be wonderful, Jones. The whole family will be there to thank you for your generosity. Generosity. Like I'd had a choice. I'll be there, I said, already forming a plan. This party would be the perfect opportunity to gather more evidence. They'd be relaxed, celebrating, maybe careless with their documents. I was already looking forward to wiping the smiles off their faces. The party was everything I'd expected and worse. Derek had hired a DJ, and there were at least 50 people crowded into the backyard. I arrived with a smile on my face and a small digital recorder in my pocket. Jones. Helen rushed over to hug me. Everyone's been dying to meet the generous man who made all this possible. She dragged me around, introducing me to relatives and friends like I was some kind of hero. Each introduction felt like a knife in my chest, but I kept smiling. Then Derek tapped a glass and called for everyone's attention. I want to make a toast, he announced, holding up expensive champagne. To Jones, the hardest working sucker in the city. Thanks for paying for our new house. The crowd erupted in laughter. Someone yelled, to Jones the sucker, and everyone raised their glasses. I felt my face burn with humiliation, but I managed to laugh along like it was all a big joke. Inside, I was taking notes. Every face, every cruel comment, every detail that proved this wasn't about helping family in need. This was about taking advantage of someone they saw as weak and stupid. During the chaos, I slipped upstairs and found Helen's home office. The door was unlocked, and there were files scattered across her desk. I took pictures of everything, my hands shaking with rage and anticipation. The files revealed more than I'd expected. Helen hadn't just taken my savings account money. She'd been systematically draining my checking account for months, making small transfers I'd never noticed. The total theft was over $60,000. But that wasn't the worst part. There were documents showing offshore bank accounts. Tax forms that had been falsified. Business licenses for companies that didn't exist. Derek wasn't just lazy, he was running a money laundering operation. And Casey's name was on half the documents. I sat in my car outside their house, staring at the photos on my phone. My wife wasn't just a victim who'd made a bad decision. She was part of a criminal conspiracy that had been going on for years. Everything I thought I knew about the woman I'd married was a lie. The next morning, I confronted Casey while she was getting ready for work. I showed her one of the bank statements, the one that showed her signature on multiple unauthorized transfers. "What is this?" I asked. Her face went pale. "Jones, I can explain." "Can you explain why you've been stealing from me for 8 months? Can you explain why your name is on business documents for companies that don't exist?" She sat down on our bed, looking like she might faint. "They'll destroy you if you try to fight them," she finally said. Those words changed everything between us forever. "What did you just say?" I asked, certain I'd heard wrong. Casey wiped her eyes and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold. Calculating. "Derek has connections, Jones. People who don't like it when someone causes problems. Are you threatening me? I'm warning you. Drop this. Pretend it never happened." I stared at my wife, this woman I'd loved and trusted, and realized I was looking at a stranger. "Start over? With what money? You took everything." Before I could respond, the front door slammed open. Helen walked into our bedroom without knocking, her face twisted with anger. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" She screamed at me. "Casey told me you're asking questions, taking pictures. You need to mind your own business." "It is my business. You stole my money." Helen laughed, a harsh sound that made me step backward. "Prove it. Go ahead, call the police." She was right, and we all knew it. Without solid proof of fraud, it was just a family dispute. "But Jones," Helen continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, "if you keep digging, you're going to find things you wish you hadn't. And some of those things might get you hurt." After Helen left, we sat in silence. Finally, I spoke. "I'm filing for divorce." Casey's face went white. She hadn't expected me to fight back. The divorce papers cost me $400 I didn't have. I had to borrow money from Davis just to pay the filing fee. But watching Casey's face when I served her the papers at breakfast was worth every penny. "You can't be serious," she said, staring at the documents. "I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Jones, please. We can work this out. I'll talk to my family." "It's too late for that, Casey. You made your choice when you stole my money. You made it again when you threatened me." She started crying, but the tears looked fake. Everything about her looked fake now. "Derek's going to be so angry," she said. "I don't care what Derek thinks. You should. He's not going to let you destroy our family." I headed toward the door. "Your family destroyed itself." That afternoon, Davis helped me move my stuff into a cheap motel room across town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. "You sure about this?" he asked as we loaded the last box. For the first time in months, I'm absolutely sure about something. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek, "Big mistake, factory boy." I smiled grimly. He had no idea what was coming. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, but it felt huge when I walked in and saw Casey sitting with her lawyer. Mr. Stewart was a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit. My lawyer, Mr. Wilson, looked tired as he shuffled through our paperwork. "Remember," he whispered, "we need to prove fraud or forgery." Mr. Stewart stood up first, painting a picture of me as an irresponsible husband who'd wasted money on gambling, then blamed his wife when it ran out. "My client was forced to liquidate their joint savings to prevent financial disaster," he said smoothly. "She acted responsibly to protect her family's interests." It was all lies, but he said it with such confidence that I started to wonder if the judge would believe him. Then it was Mr. Wilson's turn. "Your Honor, we have evidence that Mrs. Casey Gamby and her family engaged in systematic fraud against my client. They forged his electronic signature on multiple financial documents and stole over $60,000. I watched Casey's face as Mr. Wilson spoke. She looked nervous for the first time since this whole thing started. Furthermore, Mr. Wilson continued, we have recorded conversations proving this was a planned conspiracy. The judge looked interested. Let's hear this evidence. I felt hope for the first time in weeks. The courtroom was about to hear the truth. The recording played through the courtroom speakers like a bomb going off. Helen's voice, clear as day, Jones is such a pushover. Derek's voice, that computer program worked perfectly. And Casey's laugh, cold and cruel. Mr. Stewart jumped to his feet. Objection. This recording was obtained illegally. Your Honor, Mr. Wilson responded, this conversation took place on private property where my client had reasonable expectation that criminal activity was being discussed. The judge studied the legal briefs, then made his ruling. The recording is admissible, but I'll need additional corroborating evidence. That's when I produced the photographs from Helen's house. Bank statements showing systematic theft. Documents with forged signatures. Business licenses for fake companies. Mr. Stewart's confidence started to crack. Your Honor, these documents were obtained through breaking and entering. Actually, I said, speaking up, they were obtained during a family celebration where I was an invited guest. It was a stretch of the truth, but not technically a lie. The judge examined each photograph carefully. Mr. Gamby, I'm going to order a full audit of your family's financial records. This case is adjourned for 2 weeks. As we left the courtroom, I could hear Casey arguing with her lawyer in hushed tones. For the first time, she looked scared. Jones, she called out as I reached the parking lot. We need to talk. The cracks in their family were already starting to show. There's nothing to talk about, I said, not stopping. But Casey caught up and grabbed my arm. Please. Just 5 minutes. Something in her voice made me turn around. She looked terrible. Her hair was messy, her makeup smudged, and she had dark circles under her eyes. Derek and Mom are furious, she said. They're blaming me for everything. They say I should have controlled you better. Controlled me? They want me to fight this divorce, to claim you were abusive or mentally unstable. I stared at her, amazed she thought this would make me sympathetic. And what do you want to do? She was quiet for a long time, looking at her feet. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. I want out, Jones. I want out of this whole mess. My family, they're not good people. They've been using me just like they used you. So what are you saying? I'm saying if I help you prove what they did, what happens to me? I thought about it. Casey had betrayed me, but she'd also been manipulated by her family her entire life. I can't make promises, I said finally. But if you help me get my money back and make sure your family faces consequences, I'll ask my lawyer to work out a deal. Constantly checking over her shoulder. Here, she said, pressing a flash drive into my hand. Everything's on there. Bank records going back 2 years. Contracts for Derek's fake businesses. And Jones? It's worse than you thought. How much worse? They didn't just steal from you. Derek's been running this scam on other people too. Military guys mostly, people who deploy for months and leave their wives in charge of finances. There are at least 6 other victims. My stomach dropped. 6 other families? Maybe more. The records show transfers from accounts I don't recognize. Derek calls it his military wife network. He finds married women whose husbands are overseas, convinces them to help their families, and takes a cut. I stared at the flash drive, this tiny piece of plastic that contained evidence of crime spanning years and destroying dozens of lives. Casey, this is huge. This isn't just fraud, it's organized crime. I know. That's why I'm scared. She looked around the empty parking lot again. Derek found out I was asking questions. He told me if I betrayed the family, I'd regret it for the rest of my life. What does that mean? I don't know, and I don't want to find out. As she drove away, I sat alone holding evidence that could send half her family to prison. And wondering if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life. The flash drive contained everything Casey had promised and more. Spreadsheets tracking stolen money from dozens of families. Fake business licenses. Forged documents. And email conversations between Derek and his associates, discussing how to intimidate victims who got too curious. I spent 3 hours going through it all, taking notes. By the time I finished, I had proof of fraud, identity theft, money laundering, and conspiracy charges that could put Derek away for decades. But the next morning, everything changed. I woke up to pounding on my motel room door. When I opened it, Derek stood there with 2 men I'd never seen before. Big men with dead eyes and expensive suits. "We need to have a conversation," Derek said, pushing past me into my room. One of the men closed the door behind them and stood in front of it. The other examined my laptop and papers spread across the table. "Jones, Jones, Jones," Derek said, shaking his head. "You've been busy. Get out of my room. See, that's the problem. You made it our business when you started digging into things that don't concern you." The man by the table picked up one of my notebooks. "He's got names, Derek. Lots of names." Derek sighed. "I was hoping we could handle this quietly. But you had to complicate things." My phone was on the dresser, too far to reach. The men blocked both the door and the window. "What do you want?" I asked. "Forget everything. Drop the divorce. Go back to your factory job and pretend none of this happened." "And if I don't?" Derek smiled coldly. "Some people would be very interested to know where you live." After Derek and his friends left, I sat on my motel bed for an hour, trying to decide what to do. They'd taken my notebook but left everything else, including the flash drive hidden in my jacket pocket. My hands were shaking as I called Davis. "They threatened me," I told him. "Derek and 2 other guys." "Jones, you need to call the police right now." "And tell them what?" "Tell them about the evidence. The flash drive. The fraud. All of it." I looked around my crappy motel room, thinking about how I'd ended up here. A week ago, I'd been a married man with a savings account. Now I was hiding from criminals. "Davis, what if they're right? What if I should just walk away? Is that what you want to do?" I thought about the other families Derek had victimized. Military families who'd trusted their wives and lost everything. People like me who'd worked their whole lives just to have it stolen. "No," I said finally. "I want them to pay for what they did. Then call the police." That afternoon, I walked into the police station and asked to speak to someone about financial crimes. The desk sergeant directed me to Detective Collins. "Let me see what you've got," she said after I explained the situation. I handed over the flash drive and watched her face change as she scrolled through the files. "How many victims are we talking about?" she asked. "At least 8 families. This is a major financial fraud operation," Detective Collins said. "We're talking about federal charges." My phone buzzed with a text, "Drop it now, or we drop you." I showed the message to Detective Collins. "We need to talk about protective custody," she said. 3 days later, I was eating lunch at a diner when I saw the news report on TV. Helen Gabriel, 52, arrested on charges of fraud and money laundering. The reporter stood outside the house my money had bought while police officers carried boxes of evidence. My phone rang immediately. Davis's number. "Did you see the news?" "I'm watching it now," I said, unable to look away from the screen. "Jones, they got Derek too. And 3 other guys. Some kind of organized crime ring." I felt a mixture of satisfaction and fear. Satisfaction because justice was finally being served. Fear because I knew this wasn't over. Detective Collins called an hour later. We need to talk. At the station, Detective Collins spread photos across the table. We found more than we expected. This operation goes back at least 5 years. We've identified 16 victims so far, with total losses exceeding $400,000. I stared at the photos. Bank records, fake contracts, forged documents. Evidence of a criminal enterprise that had destroyed dozens of families. What about Casey? That's complicated. She's agreed to cooperate in exchange for immunity on most charges. But Jones, your wife, wasn't just a victim. She was Derek's partner. The words hit me like a physical blow. What do you mean? She recruited half the victims. Found vulnerable military wives, gained their trust, then convinced them to help their families. Everything I thought I knew about my wife had been a lie from the beginning. The woman I'd married had been a professional con artist. Casey showed up at my motel that night, crying and begging me to talk to her. Against my better judgment, I let her in. Jones, you have to believe me. I never wanted to hurt you. How long? I asked. How long have you been running cons with your brother? She sat on my bed, her face in her hands. Since before we got married. Derek introduced me to this world, and I thought it was easy money. But then I met you, and I wanted to get out. So you decided to steal everything I'd saved instead? Derek threatened me. He said if I didn't bring him money from our account, he'd tell you about everything I'd done before. I stared at this woman I'd loved, trying to find any trace of the person I thought I'd married. There's something else, she said quietly. I'm pregnant. The words stopped me cold. What? 2 months. I found out last week. She looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. Jones, this changes everything. For a moment, just a moment, I felt a flicker of the old feelings. The love, the hope, the dreams we'd shared. Then I remembered Derek's laugh when he called me a sucker. I remembered Helen's threats. I remembered the flash drive full of evidence showing how many families my wife had helped destroy. Get out, I said quietly. Jones, please. Think about our baby. Get out, and don't come back. After she left, I called Detective Collins and told her about Casey's claim. 2 days later, the detective called me back. She lied about being pregnant, Detective Collins said. Medical records show no pregnancy. Even facing prison time, Casey couldn't stop lying. The legal proceedings moved faster than I'd expected. With Casey's cooperation and the mountain of evidence, prosecutors built ironclad cases against Derek, Helen, and their associates. But there was still the matter of my money. Here's what we recovered, my lawyer told me, spreading documents across his desk. The house, the cars, Derek's motorcycle, Helen's jewelry, and about $30,000 in cash. What's it worth total? Approximately $120,000. I sat back in my chair, amazed. That's almost twice what they stole from me. Actually, they stole over $300,000 from various victims over 5 years. But most was spent on vacations and gambling. Still, it was more than I'd dared hope for. The best part came 2 weeks later, when the judge awarded me full ownership of the house my money had originally purchased. The Jones house where Derek had humiliated me at that party. Now it was mine. I stood in the driveway, holding the keys and the deed with my name on it. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, big backyard. Everything I'd dreamed of having. But the victory felt hollow without someone to share it with. That's when Casey called one last time. Jones, I heard about the house. Congratulations. What do you want, Casey? I wanted to apologize. Really apologize. What we had, in the beginning, that was real. Even if everything else was a lie. I believed her, but it didn't matter anymore. The damage was done. 6 months later, I received a call that changed everything. "Mr. Gamby? This is Attorney Johnson from the District Attorney's Office. There's been an unexpected development. We've recovered additional assets from Derek Gamby's associates. Hidden accounts, property, investments made with stolen money." My heart started beating faster. "How much?" "Approximately $200,000. Since you were the primary victim and your evidence led to breaking up this entire operation, the judge has awarded you the full amount." I had to sit down. $200,000, plus the house, plus what I'd already recovered. I'd end up with more money than I'd ever imagined having. "There's something else," Attorney Johnson continued. "The FBI is recommending you for a civilian commendation. Your courage in gathering evidence helped them shut down similar operations in 3 other states." After I hung up, I walked through my house, thinking about how much my life had changed. A year ago, I'd been a factory worker with a cheating wife and empty bank accounts. Now I owned a beautiful home and had enough money to start over however I wanted. That evening, Davis came over to help me celebrate. "So what are you going to do now?" he asked as we sat on my back porch, watching the sunset. "I've been thinking about starting my own business. A handyman service. Maybe eventually hire some guys." Davis grinned. "Jones Gamby, entrepreneur. I like the sound of that." For the first time in my adult life, I was truly free. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday morning in October. I sat alone in the courtroom as the judge declared that my marriage to Casey Gamby was officially dissolved. No alimony. No shared property. No ongoing financial obligations. Clean break. As I walked out of the courthouse, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of betrayal and anger that I'd been carrying around was finally lifting. My phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. "Is this Jones Gamby?" "Yes. This is Sergeant Thompson from Fort Bragg. I wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what?" "My wife was one of Derek Gamby's victims. She gave away my entire deployment savings while I was overseas. $28,000. His voice was thick with emotion. "Because of your evidence, we're getting our money back." After he hung up, I stood on the courthouse steps thinking about all the families who'd been affected by Derek's operation. All the marriages that had been destroyed, the trust that had been broken. At least some of those families were getting justice now. That weekend, I started my new business. Gamby Handyman Services. Just me, my truck, and a toolbox full of equipment. My first customer was Mrs. Mocht, an elderly woman who needed help fixing her front steps. "Young man," she said as I finished the job, "you do excellent work." I'd lost a wife, but I'd gained something more valuable, self-respect. 1 year after the theft that destroyed my marriage, I was running a successful business with 3 employees and more work than we could handle. The money I'd recovered had been invested wisely, and my handyman service was turning a solid profit.